Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I am talking episode 18 of season 2 of Arrow called Deathstroke. And this was hyped as being a really big episode, and wow, they were not kidding. There is a mountain of stuff to talk about, so let's just kind of get right into it. Let's start off with the smaller stuff and then kind of work our way up. First of all, let's start off with Digg and Felicity, since they didn't really have a whole lot going on this episode. So Digg's big moment, I think, was where he kind of really confronts Roy about, Roy getting all upset about Oliver, and we see, Roy react rather poorly to that. Now, what's interesting about this scene to me is that if you really think about it, in many ways, Digg would actually be the most logical person to help train Roy, not Oliver and not Sarah. Digg is ex-military, and one thing the military is pretty good at is taking angry young guys with a little bit too much energy, a little too much strength that they might otherwise be using to get themselves into trouble, and getting a little bit of discipline in them. And that's exactly what Roy needs. Also, keep in mind, if I'm remembering his backstory correctly, Digg is also from the Glades. Hang on a second, my cat is going crazy over the drawstrings on my sweatshirt. God almighty. Anything that dangles, that cat has got to turn into a toy. Oh, man. Hazards of being a pet owner, huh? Anyway. So, yeah. Being from the Glades, Digg gets where Roy is coming from. You look at Digg and you can kind of see somebody that Roy potentially could become if he had, well, obviously his destiny is to become Arsenal or Red Arrow or whatever. But if Roy had, maybe decided to, hey, why don't I join the army? It's not too unreasonable to think that he could have turned into somebody like Digg. So I think that would be really an interesting thing to do is, hey, give Digg a crack at trying to knock some sense into Roy. Oliver hasn't done so well at it, and, well, Sarah just threatened to kill Roy, so... yeah, but still, it is nice to hear her flat out say that she considers Digg to be one of her friends. So that's cool. Felicity. Well, Felicity's really been on the back burner a lot this season, which is a real shame. I'm kind of thinking, though, that she's probably going to get some really cool moments in towards the end of the season. Obviously, there's some more stuff about her family that's probably going to be revealed before all is said and done. And I can't imagine that she's not going to have a really great moment playing Mission Control or something like that in the season finale, just like she did last year. But here, I like how she just sort of steps up there and kind of gives Oliver that kick he needs to really, stop wallowing in everything that's bad that's happened and go out there and do what needs to be done. And Felicity is very good at that. She's really become sterner in her dealings with Oliver. And I like that this really shows her that she's not Oliver's secretary, that she is, just like Digg, one of Oliver's partners. Not a whole lot to say about what's going on with present day Sarah. Island Sarah, of course, though, we start seeing some of that ruthlessness that is going to be probably served her pretty well during her time with the League of Assassins coming to mind. And I even like how our Russian friend mentions his training that he got training from the KGB. Keep in mind, his counterpart in the comics is a former KGB agent called the KG Beast. Yeah, sometimes, huh? Comics. But I love how he looks at Sarah and goes, "When did you get so scary?" or "When did you become so scary?" And again, that's a really nice foreshadowing of what we know is going to ultimately end up happening to Sarah. And of course, like that, we also get to see in that she's more of her having picked up various types of skills from showing off those skills that she's picked up from her time being trained as a research assistant by Dr. Ivo, stuff she learned from her time as in the League of Assassins. It really shows that Sarah definitely has more to contribute to the whole situation besides just being really good at kicking butt. And I like that. I like that Sarah is a very formidable person, whether she's using her physical abilities or just using the old noggin. Anyway, so I guess we might as well round things out and finish talking about the gang in the Arrowcave. And of course, this is also a big episode for Roy. And unsurprisingly, it's Roy who is not handling this whole situation terribly well. Now, granted, Roy sort of hepped up on Mirakuru and having his girlfriend kidnapped by the bad guy. Well, yeah, that's not gonna do him any good at all. And this really is kind of showing the at times extremely contentious relationship that exists between Oliver and Roy in the comics. Yeah, for all intents and purposes in the comics, Roy is Oliver's adopted son. In fact, I think they even at one point made it official that Oliver either officially adopted Roy as his son or officially named him as his heir. Okay, now here it's a little bit more like Roy is sort of an adoptive younger brother, or at least I think that's ultimately what's going to happen there. But here, Roy is looking for somewhere to direct his rage. He can't get his hands on Slade Wilson, and Oliver is just the easiest target. Now, it's not that Roy doesn't have some reasons to be mad at Oliver. Oliver's the one that instigated him breaking up with Thea. And, well, let's face it, it's true. That particular domino falling is what put Thea in a position to be grabbed by Slade. But you have to figure, her being on the street like that had to have just been a lucky break for Slade. I mean, you really think that he didn't have some kind of contingency other plan in mind for getting his hands on Thea? No. Slade saw an opportunity, and he's like, oh, well, never mind my original plan. She's right there. I'll just go give her a ride home and dump her off where Brother Blood is conveniently standing. How did Brother Blood know to be standing there? I mean, I guess Slade saw Thea and was like, Sebastian, dude, go to the street corner and hang out in your scary ass mask and wait for me. I'll be bringing. I mean, it's one of those things where you probably don't want to think about the actual logistics of that too much, because if you do, you realize it's a little bit ridiculous, but whatever, right? I mean, so much of what we watch on TV is ridiculous. The way apparently law enforcement works on CSI, that's completely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. So much of the stuff you see on NCIS is, whatever. Anyway, I definitely did like Roy kind of blowing up there in the Arrowcave, just taking it out on everybody, and especially when he yells at Sarah, well, of course you agree with him, you're screwing him. And it's like, oh, Roy, you are Mirakuru or not, you're going to be very lucky to walk out of that room with all your teeth. And hey, speaking of Roy, Oliver, if you're going to be shooting arrows on a practice range with a guy who doesn't know what he's doing, maybe you should cover up, put some paneling over those rather important looking wires. I mean, seriously, dude, putting the art practice range there when Roy clearly has no idea what he's doing, that's just stupid, man. That's really, really stupid. And how in the world are you going to get that thing out of... well, maybe those arrows are plastic or something, but still, man. So anyway, I know some people kind of reacted online saying that they thought that Thea might have gotten in the car and gone off with Roy when he left the city. I really did not get the impression of that happening. I had the feeling that Roy has to imagine that Thea's probably not going to be terribly happy to see him. But he was there, he saw, with his own eyes, Thea is okay. Now, I'm going to go off somewhere and kind of think or whatever, beat up some people. But, have no fear. Roy will be back, and he'll be back pretty quickly because there's just no reason for him not to be. I mean, we are getting pretty close to the finale, so he has to be. And let's see. Okay, that rounds out everybody in the cave. not a lot to say about Moira this episode. I mean, this is just another big gut punch to her. But I did love that she did briefly, due to her reaction to the whole Thea being kidnapped thing, have a little flashback to her conversation with Malcolm Merlin. And again, that's just a nice little way of reminding us that, hey, yeah, Malcolm's still alive, he's still around, and yeah. So I don't think it'll be too awful long before we are graced by the wonderful presence of John Barrowman again. And yeah, this is going to be fun stuff. And you have to imagine he is not going to react well to having Thea kidnapped. So let's see here. Since she's the kind of the person that everything revolves around this episode, let's talk about Thea. I really liked her interactions with Slade, and I love that moment where he says to her, "Yeah, why don't you tell me exactly what a 19-year-old girl is gonna do?" Just really making sure Thea understands that she is in no position whatsoever to threaten Slade. And I really love how Slade even says, "Door's right there. You can walk out. None of my guys are going to stop you. But if you don't leave, I'll tell you Oliver's secret." And again, we have to remember that just the other episode, Thea was saying to Oliver, "You are the one person that I can trust. You're the one person who doesn't lie to me." And I love how Slade even phrases it as Oliver's secret. Because obviously Moira is going to know that Thea is Malcolm's daughter. But this means that to Thea that Oliver at some point found out about this, of course, and did not tell her. Now, obviously Thea is not thinking terribly clearly here, because it has to raise the question, when did Oliver learn this? And if Oliver were to have learned this after Malcolm Merlin was revealed as an evil nutcase, well, it would make sense that he probably wouldn't want to tell her. But Thea is really in a bad place emotionally right now. She's seriously hurting from being dumped by Roy. She just got kidnapped by this guy who she thought was her mom, well, at least maybe not a friend, but at least an ally of her mother. And now she's just been told that, her father, her true man she grew up thinking was her father isn't, and that her true father is an evil nutcase. Now, one has to wonder why Thea apparently doesn't question this at all, but I think it's just one of those things where Thea it's one of those moments where just a lot of little things click into place. So many little things about Moira's behavior, Oliver's behavior, because Oliver's acted weird for a long time, and while you could logically dismiss it as PSTD from the island, but in any case, it's clear that for whatever reason, Thea has absolutely no problem believing that this is true. And of course, this has to mean that Tommy's death has hit her on a whole new level all over again. And Malcolm is believed to be dead, so even though the man she thought was her father, well, you get what I'm saying. So I was reading this little interview with Willa Holland, Thea's actress, and they were asking her, well, what do you think about this? And is this going to play a role in Thea's ultimate destiny? And she says, well, this is of course going to have a big impact on Thea, and the question is whether or not she's going to become a hero or a villain. Is something that yeah. Now that's interesting, because this sort of again does kind of keep in the air the question, well, is Thea going to become Speedy? Is Roy going to be the one who really properly takes on the role of Oliver's sidekick? Or, obviously this whole thing with Thea, this is the sort of thing that's going to probably bring Malcolm Merlin running. And is it really that inconceivable to think that after being lied to by her mother and her brother, that Thea, if Malcolm were to pop up on her doorstep and go, like, yeah, okay, I'm evil, but I have absolutely no reason to lie to you. Tommy's dead. You are the one thing in this world that I still have left. And oh man, talk about the ultimate revenge on Oliver and Moira, getting Thea to come with him. And the cool thing about this is, Oliver would really, really not be up for the idea of training Thea to be a vigilante like himself. But do you think that Malcolm Merlyn would have any compunctions whatsoever about dropping some of that League of Assassins training on Thea? I can see Malcolm as wanting her to follow in his footsteps. Or at least saying, Thea, there's this dude named Ra's al Ghul who totally wants me dead. Now that it's kind of known that you're my daughter, you're going to need to know how to look out for yourself. So, yeah, that could, and just imagine that if Oliver and Roy at some point had to have a showdown with Thea and Malcolm as the opposition. Oh my god, the possibilities, huh? Anyway, let me see here. Oh yeah, one thing, just looking at my notes there, I noticed that this episode was directed by Guy B. This is a guy with plenty of experience here on Arrow, also a very sought-after director for particularly pilot episodes of various TV shows. I believe it's even been said that he's going to be directing the pilot of The Flash. Mr. B is a very, very talented director. It was really great that they got him back for this episode. And speaking of good direction, man, the action sequences in this episode, so good. I mean, seriously, I think Arrow probably has the best action team on TV right now. It is phenomenal what they are pulling off. Let me see here. Let's see. Yeah, let's just kind of continue on, and well, we might as well wrap up the good guys, and then we'll go and talk about the bad guys. Oliver. So Oliver, this episode. Okay, obviously you could tell that him signing off on making Isabel CEO, that was obviously an incredibly stupid move, and we all, I think, saw that she was going to backstab him there. But to be completely fair to Oliver, one, he was really emotionally not in a place where he gave a crap about what was going on at Queen Consolidated. Two, at this point, he's been working with Isabel pretty closely for a good while, and she apparently seems to be on board with helping him run Queen Consolidated properly. Now, the idea that he somehow forgot that she's basically a ruthless corporate raider who he barely managed to keep from stealing the company away from him, well, you'd think that Oliver would be a little bit more wary, but still. So far, Isabel has apparently taken that defeat earlier in the season gracefully and has been reasonably helpful, has been pretty helpful from the impression that we get that about, especially given all the stuff she says about all the meetings and such that Oliver misses. So I guess he's just sort of like, okay, she's accepted that I got her on that one gracefully, and now she's just sort of focused on trying to make this company as good as she can. And then there's of course the whole he had sex with her thing. So yeah. Now, obviously, that was almost certainly a ploy on Isabel's part to further set Oliver up, but we'll talk about her more in a minute. So, anyway, one thing that was slightly disappointing me about that is if you paid attention to the preview for this episode that they aired last week, you can kind of see Oliver fighting with somebody who's obviously a female in a business suit. So I think that kind of spoiled it a little bit, but I don't think anyone was hugely surprised that Isabel ultimately turned out to be a bad guy. And I guess this answers the question of who knocked out Digg in the other episode. I think I was saying that I imagined it to be Huntress, but I guess she hadn't teamed up with Deathstroke after all. I can't actually remember what exactly I said that review. But anyway, so I also like how it's really not Moira that Thea is directing this anger at. It's Oliver. And, Oliver can't deny it. He has made this choice. And here it is, once again highlighting to him that he's really not so different from his mother as he likes to imagine. And this has to be a especially painful revelation after they went over it once again, that Oliver's like, look, I'm going to publicly support your campaign, but I don't really think of you as my mother anymore. And again, Oliver is doing basically the exact same thing that Moira has been doing in lying to Thea, but he's thinking like, okay, it's wrong when she does it, but it's okay when I do it. And that's kind of BS, Oliver. And of course we see Roy. Well, we've talked about Roy and what's going on with him and Oliver. And I definitely love that scene in the police station where he and Slade really had their first moment where they could really be 100% real with each other on neutral territory. And I also like the fact that Oliver just flat out was willing to just beg Slade, please keep my family out of this. But of course, no dice from Slade. And I like that speech that Oliver gave at the end where he really acknowledges that so much of what is going on are the consequences of his mistakes. And it's pretty easy to see, yeah, that's true. Oliver has made some really bad calls. He's not been honest with his family. He's really shirked his job. He's shirked his responsibilities at Queen Industries. He's not done a very good job of mentoring Roy, even though he has all these people around him who could probably help him out. But at the end, he finds it in himself to, like, okay, counterattack time. And this is going to lead us up to some juicy stuff, I can tell. Oh, geez, we forgot to talk about Quentin Lance. Not a huge amount to say about him this time around. It's just, Quentin, if you're going to keep helping out the vigilante, you need to stop doing stuff that makes it very obvious publicly that you are working with the vigilante. And maybe you guys should stop constantly calling the same cop to arrest people if you don't want the guys in law enforcement to realize that he's working with you. And what the heck good was dragging Slade down to the police station gonna do anyway? It's not like he was gonna admit. It's like, yeah, I kidnapped Thea Queen. She's at the warehouse on 18th Street. I mean, really, granted, that did give him a chance to where Oliver and Slade could kind of talk in private, but, you got Felicity there, Oliver. I'm pretty sure if she can find Slade Wilson's phone number, or, whatever. Or, hey, you know what? Ask your mom for Slade Wilson's phone number, Oliver. I'm pretty sure she probably has it. Anyway, so, bad guys. Not a huge amount to say about Brother Blood this time around, except I love how Slade goes, basically tells him, I hope that was, basically kind of calls him out on his tone. It's like, it was such a great way of reminding him. It's like, dude, I can totally kill you anytime I want. You know that, right? But yeah, Sebastian Blood does do foaming at the mouth quite well. So that's going to be kind of cool. And I also like how, and it's very ominous how Slade says, I promised that you would have Starling City. I didn't say I would make you mayor. So, kind of have to wonder that, and that little army of convicts he got, that's probably not going to end well for the people of Starling City. Now, Isabel. Isabel is one of the big ones this time around. And I think this episode, it might not quite spell it out, but the big thing that people have been wondering about her is Isabel Ravager? Is she Slade Wilson's daughter, Rose, from the comics, or some counterpart to her? Well, one thing I noticed, and people were talking about this episode online, was they found a screen cap from season 1, and you can clearly see the name Isabel, and then the last name is kind of blurry on a page from Oliver's dad's book. And I'm just going to assume that it's not a coincidence that Isabel Rorschach probably genuinely was on there. She's exactly the sort of person that would have been on that list, which of course just makes Oliver trusting her with. Okay. So we've shown that she shows that she does have some genuine fighting abilities. Now, I have the feeling that she was probably let Oliver win that fight just to sort of further her own agenda and what was going on with Slade. In the comics, Ravager is very, very good. I mean, she's up there in terms of fighting ability. But of course, in the comics, she's also still a teenager. Here, obviously, her character is a little bit older, but I'm just going to operate under the assumption that she's Ravager. It really is the only thing at this point that makes sense. Now, if she's going to turn out to actually be Slade's daughter, I mean, she did spin out that story about being from Russia and all this other stuff, but yeah, I don't think it would be too hard to imagine that that's all a lie, and that her going out there and doing all that corporate raiding was probably where Slade got the funds to pull off everything that he's done so far. In fact, if you stop and think about it, that makes total sense. So I'm going to just say that for the most part, it's pretty unthinkable that she's anybody but Ravager. But if her real name is going to be Rose, and she's going to turn out to actually be Slade's daughter, that's to me is still up in the air. But I'm just going to think of her as Ravager from now on. And now Slade, here's one where we really sort of get into his head, and we get to see his thought process and his planning play out. But we also get to see that like freaking evil Shadow is in his head whispering all of this stuff to him. And of course, this is all likely just his own thoughts sort of manifesting, the way Oliver sometimes has had visions of Shadow. I don't really think this is going to turn out to be any kind of superpower or supernatural explanation for that. Although, if there is something more to what happened to Shadow on the island, then that would make Sarah's comment from earlier in the season, what happened to Slade, what happened to Shadow, makes sense. Now, obviously, Sarah doesn't know what happened to Slade because even Oliver asks, "How did you get off the island?" So maybe that question from Sarah early in the season was a mistake, but maybe not. Maybe there's a little bit more to what happened to Shadow on the island than we've been led to believe. Because one thing we need to keep in mind, in the comics, Shadow was a villain. So, and in fact, in the Green Arrow comics I was reading the other week, it talked about her life as an assassin. Now, granted, she's Yao Fei's daughter and all this, but I'm just saying, just because she seemed to have been a good guy on the island does not mean that she was necessarily a good guy out there in the real world. So, again, there's possibilities that there's more about Shadow to be uncovered. So let's put it that way. Let me see here. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to say about Deathstroke. Did you notice when he's at the bus and he starts to pull that sword off of his back, it immediately cuts to him throwing it into a guard and impaling the guy? Okay, you know why that is? Because, and this is something I learned recently. I was listening to this podcast, and they were talking. This lady was talking about to a fantasy writer about how you could incorporate more realistic elements into your stories, and this guy was interested in. He was sort of pointing out some of the obvious flaws that people put in fantasy stories in regards to things with weapons and fight scenes. And this guy is a martial artist, and he mentions that he even had a guy like a for real blacksmith in his family. And one thing he points out is that drove him nuts was he hates stories where there's guys walking around with big old swords strapped to their backs. And he says, if you try and pull this out, a sword off strapped to your back, and do it out like that, in order the way to do it properly is you're basically going to have to bend over like you're bowing in order to get it out of there properly, simply because your arm is not long enough. And if you actually stop and think about it and try and imagine that with your own hand and arm, you realize that's totally right. Now, granted, it's TV, rule of cool. All right, I just never thought of that before, and I thought it was interesting. So I kind of want to point that out to you guys. Let me see here. Oh yeah, I also we forgot to talk about Laurel. I love how this episode Laurel was kind of mentioning she wanted to talk to Moira. Laurel, do you have any idea how much Moira probably does not want to talk to you? You were essentially you tried her for murder and were trying to get her the death penalty. She doesn't want to talk to you. And then of course Slade shows up at her door and goes, "Hey, I don't mean to bug you, but Oliver is the Arrow. Bye." And I don't think that scene at the end where Sarah is thinking about what's to say, and suddenly all these little things are falling into place. Especially what was that, episode 3 of season 1 where Oliver got lucky with that knife? Although it was actually Digg who called him out on that one, if I remember correctly. So, let me see. Yeah, that covers everything that I have for you, guys, this time around. Again, this is another really, really good episode. I have the feeling with everything they're setting up so far that when it really hits the fan, it's going to be spectacular. And what's really cool about this is now we have three major bad guys here. We got Brother Blood, we've got Ravager, and we've got Deathstroke. But we also have three heroes here. We got Oliver, we got Arrow, we got Black Canary, and possibly Arsenal or Red Arrow or whatever's going on with Roy. And you have to imagine that Suicide Squad is out there, so and Digg, so you know Malcolm Merlin. Just imagine this. I mean, Ollie versus Slade, Sarah versus Isabel, maybe Roy versus Brother Blood, and then Malcolm and Suicide Squad and Digg all having to fight Brother Blood's army in the city or something like that. I mean, I'm kind of spitballing here, but oh my god, this is gonna be so damn good. I love this show. I love this show. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you this time around. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. I have been practicing my live tweeting more. If you do follow me on Twitter, last night I practiced on of all things Chopped Canada, just because the people that run their Twitter account are very responsive to fans who tweet about it. And also just practiced by live tweeting the last night's episode of Elementary. I'm still kind of getting the hang of live tweeting, but one thing I got to tell you, folks, I'm still having an absolute blast live tweeting the 100. It's actually gotten quite a bit better since the first episode, but it's not a bad show by any means, but there's just so much in it that is wonderful fodder for making fun of. I'm definitely going to keep doing that. So, I'm not going to start reviewing the 100, but if you're enjoying the show, definitely join me on Twitter because, oh god, do I have a blast with Twitter when that show is on. Anyway, that's it for this time around. So until next time, take care and have a good one.